Hello and welcome to our Lunch and Learn. I am Roger Narlock. I am a professor in the psychology department and also director of the Benedictine Institute. And I would like to first welcome you. Hope you enjoyed the food. And also I have the pleasure of introducing today's speaker, Karlyn Forner. At the end of this, there will be some time for question and answer. And then after that, Trissa Schaefer, the administrative assistant for the Benedictine Institute, will have a few announcements about some of our upcoming programming, some of which is very much related to what you're going to hear today. Karlyn Forner is a historian and author of the book, Why the Vote Wasn't Enough for Selma. From 2014 to 2018, she served as the project manager for a documentary website that tells the history of grassroots organizing in the civil rights movement from the perspectives of the activists themselves. She is a member of the Movement History Initiative, an ongoing collaboration among veterans of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, contemporary activists, movement historians, and archivists in effort to document and extend the tradition of grassroots organizing in the Black freedom struggle. Karlyn came to St. John's and St. Ben's in 2018 and serves as the grants partner in the Research and Grants Office. When she first began working here, Karlyn and I were sharing stories about our vocational paths, and I vividly remember one particular aspect of that conversation. She said she knew the moment she set foot on these campuses that she would work here for the rest of her career. What an example of Benedictine stability. I've had the good fortune of getting to know Karlyn as she has participated in many Benedictine Institute offerings, including our Benedictine Education Program and a couple of book discussions. During these conversations, she repeatedly noted the parallels she was noticing between grassroots organizers and a Benedictine view of the world. So I quickly planted a seed about her giving a talk on that topic, and therefore I am very excited to hear her elaborate on those connections today. Please join me in welcoming Karlyn Forner.
Well, thank you for that introduction. Roger warned me. I sent him a bio for the introduction, and then he said that he was going to ad-lib a little bit, so I wasn't quite sure what was going to be included in that. So thank you. Thanks, everyone, for being here today. Today we're going to chat a little bit about grassroots organizing and Benedictine values, which may not immediately go together in people's minds. Like, you may not think of grassroots organizing and Benedictine values like right at the same moment. But like what Roger was saying, this is something that I have gotten a chance to think about in the last 3 years that I have been here, and I'm sharing some of this with you today. So I think the place to start is just a little bit of background. Roger mentioned this, but starting in 2014, I was the project manager for something called the SNCC Digital Gateway website, which was a collaborative project with movement veterans of the SNCC Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. And part of the reason for them wanting to put together this website to tell their history was because historians had gotten the story of the civil rights movement so wrong. And it wasn't a story of the movement that they recognized. So the SNCC Digital Gateway was about telling the history of the movement from the perspective of the activists themselves and really putting the story of grassroots organizing at the very center of that story. So since 2014, I've been in what is more or less like an apprenticeship with the SNCC Veterans Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, is abbreviated SNCC or SNCC. And the thing about the SNCC veterans is that once you have shown that you can do good work for them, they find more work for you to do. So even though I work here full time, I am also in this like continuing relationship with the movement veterans, which is ultimately like an honor and a privilege. So that is the SNCC Digital Gateway. And then the question is, who was the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee? So SNCC emerged out of the student sit-ins starting in 1960 in Greensboro, North Carolina. And the sit-in movement took off across the whole South. Like as soon as students started sitting in one place, they started sitting in across the entire South, sort of different groups of students being motivated to make change in their life. So the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was formed in April 1960 under the leadership of Ms. Ella Baker, who had been organizing with the NAACP in the 1940s and doing this grassroots organizing work for a really long time. And she sort of encouraged the students to form their own organization and make decisions for themselves. So SNCC starts by doing the sit-ins, they quickly move into the freedom rides, and then in not long, under the influence of people like Ms. Baker, who you can see on, let's see, your far right, and people who came out of World War II and were World War II veterans based in the Deep South and came back to their home communities and recognized that they weren't able to vote and that there were all of these barriers facing them even though they had just fought a war for democracy. So there was this older generation that was mentoring SNCC activists and quickly pushed them towards voter registration. Because unlike direct action, voter registration was about changing the source of power in the Deep South, that Black people were prevented from voting in Deep South communities and that they made up the majority. So if Black people had the vote and could actually vote, this was a way of changing the circumstances of their life so that they could actually make the decisions and influence sort of the power dynamics in their lives. So SNCC then moves into the Deep South, into Mississippi, in the Alabama Black Belt, and Southwest Georgia, and is doing this community organizing work where they are going into communities, they're embedding themselves in these communities and working with local people who had been organizing before, well before they got there, and helping people create change in their own life. So there's a long history of SNCC, but that's sort of the short version of it. So then the question of what do SNCC and Benedictine values have to do with each other? And as I go into sort of this part of the conversation, I really have two disclaimers. The first is that I'm not making any argument that SNCC and the rule of Benedict and monastic communities are moving towards the same higher purpose. Like this is very much a sort of lived out, like how Benedictine values are lived out in the world have a lot of parallels with how SNCC approached their grassroots organizing work. So this isn't a conversation about that's really about for the sake of what. The purposes that SNCC were moving towards and monastic communities is it's a very different sort of, set of end goals. So this is really a conversation about what this looks like, in the day-to-day living this out. And then my second disclaimer with this is that I am not a theologian. Most everything that I have learned about the rule of Benedict and Benedictine values has come from the Benedictine Institute and being in relationship with our monastic communities. So I am more going to talk about SNCC and hint at how there are parallels and alignments with Benedictine values, but know that I am no expert on Benedictine values, and we have folks on campus who have that knowledge. So those are my two disclaimers going into this. And then I guess my one other thing is that what I have learned with working with SNCC veterans is that you should never try to talk for the SNCC veterans. They are better at saying it themselves. And I could never recap as fully as they can their experiences and their perspective. So I'm going to share a lot of different voices from SNCC that I've had the privilege of working with over the past few years with sort of some Benedictine framing. So this is directly from the Rule of Benedict. Your way of acting should be different from the world's way. Speak truth with heart and tongue. So the first Benedictine value that I'm going to reflect on and have the SNCC veterans sort of speak to is service and humility. So from the Rule of Benedict, the brothers should serve one another. Consequently, no one will be excused from kitchen service unless they are sick or engaged in some important business of the monastery. Such service increases reward and fosters love. Let those who are not strong have help so that they may serve without distress. And then this here is Judy Richardson talking about some of this from a SNCC perspective.
It's 1963. I have just taken off what I think is going to be the semester of my sophomore year at Swarthmore College in Pennsylvania. I had come through Cambridge, had worked there, and was on my way back to Cambridge with the field secretary there, SNCC field secretary there, Reggie Robinson, back to Cambridge. And he says, oh, let's stop by the national office on our way back to Cambridge. And so I get there, and I'm thinking national office, right? Whoa, okay. I get there, it's this little dinky office at 8.5 Raymond Street, off the side street off what was then Hunter Street, above a beauty parlor. And when I get there, what I see is Reggie go up to this rather large black guy who has overalls on. And he's up at the top of the stairs, and he's sweeping the stairs. And I see Reggie go up to him, and they just hug each other. And he says, and Reggie says, hey, Captain, how you doing? And the guy says, how you doing? And I'm thinking, boy, this is an egalitarian organization. You know, he's hugging the janitor. Okay? Yeah, well, then I find out that this is, you know, Jim Foreman, the executive secretary, who routinely swept the office. Now, he did not do it very well, let me just say. But it was his thing. He would sweep the office, and the reason was he wanted to show that no job was too small for anyone in the organization to do, and that every job was equally important.
So as you can see, this is really common across SNCC, this idea that there's no job that's too small, that all jobs are important. And that is something that SNCC played out in their relationship with each other, with members of the organization, and it's how they approached their communities as well, you know, the communities that they were embedded in, that this is ultimately this very like humble position that I am here to serve you. What job do you need me to do? What can you do? What can you contribute? Sort of, you know, this approach that like we need everyone in this and everyone's job is important. And that's something that I think, at least in my sort of learning more about Benedictine living throughout the years, has really come across in the monastic communities and in the rule of Benedict as well. You know, the same idea that there's no job that's too small, that all of this makes us a community. So SNCC really sort of lived that out as well. So next I want to talk about obedience, which is also maybe not what you'd think about when you think about the civil rights movement. And so from the rule of Benedict, the first step of humility is unhesitating obedience. So what obedience looks like in SNCC is sort of different depending on how you're looking at it. I think that there's really a sense of obedience and really mutual obedience, which is in the rule of Benedict, to each other and sort of the broader mission, sort of this recognition that there is something bigger than us that we are working towards, and we are all united in this, and we will be responsible, accountable, obedient to the folks that we are working with and with the communities that we're embedding in. And so on that note, this is SNCC Field Secretary Ivan Hodonaldson reflecting on some of this.
You know, SNCC was one of these organizations that I guess sort of assumed anybody could do anything. And I was in Atlanta, you know, I don't even know if I was old enough to vote. And Foreman told me, well, you need to go to Louisville and help out up there. And I just dropped off some books at Miles College and came over to Atlanta. I was figuring out what my next mission was going to be. I'd never been to Louisville. In fact, I don't think I've ever been to Kentucky except to pick up things in Louisville to take south, you know, to Clarksdale. But Reggie Robinson and Bob Zellner drove me up to Louisville, Kentucky. And I'd seen her before in Atlanta, but I met Ann Braden and Carl Braden. I stayed in their home. And we proceeded, I think SNCC gave me like $25 and said, go forth and organize a movement. And, you know, it was just the way things work. You know, I got a car ride and $25. Ann gave me home, fed me, and, you know, the rest was just history. So we went down to West End.
So no one would say that, you know, how Jim Foreman, SNCC's executive secretary, has come up in both of these last two clips. And I'm by no way saying that Jim Foreman is like the role of the abbot in the rule of Benedict. SNCC is a small d, democratic, egalitarian organization and would bristle at the suggestion that they were, you know, following the directives of such and such. But on the flip side, like, you can hear sort of that the obedience coming through in that of like, well, we're working towards this goal. I don't really know that much about it, but you know what, like, Foreman has faith in me, so I'm going to take this $25 and my car ride and I'm gonna go organize in Louisville because that's what I need to do right now. And SNCC folks across the organization sort of had that same commitment and approach to their work, that there was a job that needed to be done in service of this greater mission, and that they were gonna do what that was. So the next is community. And from the Rule of Benedict, the workshop where we are to toil faithfully at all these tasks in the enclosure of the monastery and stability in community. Arrange everything that the strong have something to yearn for and the weak nothing to run from. Shun arrogance, respect the elders, and love the young. So SNCC's vision for their voter registration work, for empowering Black communities in the Deep South to make change in their lives, was not something that they came into communities with a sense of exactly what was gonna happen, and that they told the local people what to do, and then that played out, and then the local people did it, and whatever results were achieved. That this was all about being in community with the communities that they were embedding themselves in, and it was about what sort of work are you doing already? How can we help you? How do we build this base of power so there can be justice and equality, and we can have resources in our communities? So that was the whole approach. So community was so central to what SNCC was doing. And so these next two clips come from two SNCC field secretaries who were working in Lowndes County, Alabama, which was the home of the very first Black Panther Party. So this is about organizing an independent political party so that Black people could hold power in places where they were the majority. And so this is in Lowndes County, Alabama. And both Cortland Cox and Jennifer Lawson are the field secretaries. And you can hear in how they talk, how community was so central to the work that they were doing. So Cortland is the one with the hat sitting in between Bob Dylan and Pete Seeger.
I think the most important thing was that we were prepared to stay in that community, live in those circumstances. We were there day and night. And I think people watched that, and there was a sense, I'm getting back to the term freedom riders, there was a sense from a lot of people in the South, not as much later on, but in the early days, that we, even though we were brutalized, the freedom rides and the sit-ins and so forth, we kept coming back. We were prepared to be there for the long haul, and we were not going to be beaten back by the use of force. I mean, I think that probably was attractive to a certain group of people. I would say the Amzie Moores and the Jacksons and the Hewletts. I would say a Black middle class who wanted to make these kinds of changes. So these were the first people to invest in us, the Pettigrews. They were going to say, all right, if they're prepared to do these things, we're prepared to be with them. Steptoe, Hartman, Turnbow, and so forth. So that whole group of Black people. I think then the teachers and the professionals who had to interact with the white community, they were not going to be visible with you. They were going to be in the shadows, but they'll be, And I just think then you had a division within the Black community where, a number of people were going to be strong with you. And if you didn't do anything crazy, and if you were prepared to look them in the eye and deal with their dignity, to eat what they were eating, to be there on an ongoing basis, they were prepared to take a chance because, the situations that they were involved in probably they wanted to change. I just think the most important thing was that for us, it was that we were prepared to be there. I mean, day in and day out, and be with them. So, I'm not sure. At the end of the day, you don't really know how the entire community felt, but you could look at some of the stratas of people who were prepared to work with you and deal with you. And I would say particularly the black middle class in the rural areas who they generally owned some land or had some strength, I think they were prepared to make the change.
And then this is Jennifer Lawson, who is reflecting on what some of that work and organizing work looked like from day to day in Lowndes County. And Jennifer is the one on the right.
And our work would be that we'd get up in the morning, we'd go out, and we would meet with people at their homes. We'd knock on doors. We'd go out in the fields. People would drop you out in the fields, and you try to be as unobtrusive as possible. If people were working in the fields, you'd walk along with them as they worked and talk to them about what you were trying to do and what they needed and what they wanted to have happen in the county. Because it wasn't also about us. It was about what the people there were already doing. There were people who really wanted a changed circumstance. And so we then were supporting what they were doing as well. So together we would then work with them. We'd meet at churches. There were some pastors who were courageous enough to allow their churches to be used. And I do mean courageous because there were churches that would be burned. There were pastors and people who would be run out of town or evicted from the work that they were doing. And their families would lose their jobs and lose any income they had. So it really took courage to do these things. But we would work with them, get people registered to vote, and then we started talking about, with their own political party, then actually going and creating a slate of candidates, them running for office, and the potential of them then becoming the county officers.
So as you can hear from both Karlyn and Jennifer, community was so central to the organizing work that SNCC was doing. One of the sort of key principles of Ms. Ella Baker that she sort of passed on to the SNCC folks was that strong people don't need strong leaders. And so SNCC was essentially always trying to organize themselves out of a job. It was about empowering people. It was about leadership, development, and recognizing that people have the knowledge and ability to make change in their own lives and working together that they can make a difference in the communities that they're living in. So that's always, it's essential, to SNCC's organizing work, and I think resonates so much with the Benedictine values of community and stability and sort of this being there for the long haul. This isn't just an easy in and out kind of thing. This is like a commitment over years and potentially a lifetime. And so, SNCC, they were like 17, 8, like they're young. They are so young when they're organizing this, but this is their core principle that they're moving through the world with. And I think that just resonates so much with some of these core Benedictine values. And so then the last one that I want to emphasize is listen. So listen with the ear of your heart. We're all really familiar with that. And then there's this one that is, as often as anything important is to be done in the monastery, the abbot shall call the whole community together and himself explain what the business is. And after hearing the advice of the brothers, let him ponder it and follow what he judges the wiser course. The reason why we have said all should be called for counsel is that the Lord often reveals what is better to the younger. One thing that I have found especially interesting in the Rule of Benedict is the idea about respect the elders, but also listen to the young, because maybe the young folks know something that the rest of us don't, and how it's so important to take into account all of the voices in the community and how all of those voices are important. And so this is certainly something that SNCC had front and center. I mean, internally, SNCC was known for these interminable meetings that would start at 6 p.m. and end at 7 a.m. the next morning. People would go out and get some dinner and a beer and come back, and the meeting was still going, and people were sleeping during the meeting. So, SNCC always took the time to listen to everyone. It's not that they always agreed, but everyone got to have a voice. And then the same, it looked a little different in communities, but listening was so central to this work. So next is going to be Worth Long, who is a SNCC field secretary who was working in Selma, Alabama, and other places. But Worth is going to talk about especially that listen to the young and what that looked like in SNCC. So here's Worth.
I went into Selma, Alabama, the day after 4 little girls were killed in Birmingham, Alabama. And what I found there was even though the organization, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, had taught freedom songs and taught organizing methods to the students, was that the leaders from the SNCC were not there. But the students spontaneously had decided in response to what happened in Birmingham that they were going to march down themselves, not only in protest of what had happened, but also for the right to vote. And they had organized it themselves. And people like Betty Mae Fikes, when I got to Selma, had folk getting ready to march downtown in Selma, Alabama, in one of the first major demonstrations that was to happen, and that was youth-led. So what I did, I think I was with Julian Bond at that time, is I gave him my wallet, and I joined the line with these youth, and knowing that I was going to have to go to jail. And I went to jail with them and followed their leadership. And one of the reasons that movement was a success and is a success and is remembered is because of students taking the initiative themselves and then organizing not just other students, but their families, their parents, their neighbors, in such a way that we developed a major movement. This was in 1963. This is before a mass movement happened.
And so that's a theme across SNCC, how central young people are to not only taking action, but also shaping the direction of what organizing looked like and saying, these are the needs in our community, and this is how we should go about things. And that was always, young people's voices were always central in the type of work that SNCC was doing. And then for this very last clip, these sort of principles, cores of grassroots organizing continue. And so the SNCC folks are in conversation with folks who are organizing in the movement for Black Lives and other organizations. So in this next clip, there's Phil Agnew, who's from the Dream Defenders, who was an organization that came out of the murder of Trayvon Martin in Florida. And then there was also Derek Johnson, who is now in charge of the national NAACP, but was in charge of the Mississippi NAA in this clip, and Zohara Simmons, who was another SNCC field secretary. Again, talking about the importance of listening.
One of the most important things, and I know y'all know the joy of knocking on doors, right? That's, for me, that's one of the most, we call it KOD. If y'all know, in Miami, that has a special. So we call it KOD, knocking on doors. And it's one of the most amazing, experiences. And let me tell you why. It's so important.
Pen is the fire, my mouth is the fumes to spark a revolution. Through education and dedication, we can save our black schools.
Local people are at the center of our work. Chokwe Lumumba, if you don't love the people, you can't lead the people. Organizational identity is irrelevant in local communities because local communities define what's in their best interest. It is our role to work through that to support their work for the outcomes they seek.
We thought the first thing we had to do was to begin building a sense of community. We held cookouts outdoors when weather permitted. We blasted rock and roll music, jazz, blues. People would dance and mingle. We would intersperse the music with consciousness raising, heavy doses of Black history. We saw that really was an important part of sort of waking people up. We had voter registration tables at all of these gatherings with literature and talked about the importance of voting for changing the conditions that they were faced with?
This is an intentional process of listening to each of the communities that we're a part of. We'll be doing the basic organizing things, nothing revolutionary, but canvassing, mapping local terrain, hosting local community ciphers that we're going to build with community squads to build our base and prepare for our future campaign work. So, underlying point, the elephant in the room is that I'm not presenting our campaign work. That's going to emanate from a process over the next 6 months of developing that with the communities that we're working in.
We also had to build a program of work. How we came up with those 5 primary areas, we did a listening tour of local people to find out what were the things that what they were concerned with, and that is what informed our strategy.
These things are operable all the time. Listen to the people. Love the people, be open to constructive criticism, remain flexible and open to course corrections in your work.
I partly love this shot right here because all the folks on the screen, except for Zohara Simmons, are all folks who are organizing right now, who are really tapped into grassroots organizing efforts all across the country. And I love this shot because they're all here like taking notes on what she's saying, that these things that were at the core of SNCC's organizing are so relevant for our world today and the moment that we're in. And I think, again, I am no expert on the rule of Benedict or Benedictine values, but I can't help but notice the parallels between how SNCC went about its work and continues to go about its work and the core Benedictine values that we talk about, the Benedictine Institute and all the different programs and how we sort of use them on campus. Like Benedictine values are talked about all over the place in so many different circumstances. And I think the real takeaway of this, and especially in terms of like how we live these out in our day-to-day life, is that sometimes Benedictine values get talked about, especially like hospitality, as like opening a door for someone or smiling at someone or greeting them or inviting your family over to Thanksgiving, which are all like, there's nothing wrong with any of those. But what I think both the Rule of Benedict and SNCC's grassroots organizing calls us to is radically recognizing the value of every person. In the Rule of Benedict, greet guests as Christ. And SNCC's organizing approached that in the exact same way, that if we are really going to take seriously the proposition that everyone is worthwhile and that everyone's voice needs to be a part of the conversation and incorporated and listened to in order for us to be who we are going to be, that's an incredibly radical proposition and incredibly hard to live out on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's really the takeaway that I see, the sort of alignment of Benedictine values and SNCC's grassroots organizing. And the ones that I picked out, there are a lot of other examples of this too. Like you could have an entirely different talk than the one that I just did. But at this core, the sort of idea about valuing people in their entirety and that we need that to be the community that we're going to be, I think is really radical. And just to do a shout out too to the work that's going on campus right now, the work that Becoming a Community is doing in this idea of transformative inclusion has a lot of this at its core. And it's something that this is not an easy project. This is something that really takes embedding in community, listening to people, humility, service, all of these things that we talk about. So in all of this, I see a lot of potential, of really exciting potential, and that we have so many places where we can learn from to sort of move towards this vision. So thank you. Thank you very much for joining me in sort of this exploration. And I'd welcome any questions that anyone has.
I was struck by by a number of things, but you have to love the people to lead the people, and what I want to ask about is the challenge of that how do you love the George Wallaces and the local offices and the people who are resistant to what we're trying to do? How did or does SNCC approach that problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. And SNCC does not approach that. Like when Zohara Simmons talks about loving the people, SNCC is talking about organizing in the Black community and sort of the people that you are uniting together to sort of create change in your own community. So I don't, there's a contingent of SNCC who, believed in nonviolence as a way of life and were really motivated by this idea of love and loving everyone. SNCC as a whole more used nonviolence as a tactic. And we're generally, like when Zohara Simmons is talking about loving the people, she's really talking about the communities that you're embedded in. So it's not, that's an interesting and, challenging problem, but SNCC wasn't engaging with it in that way.
And yet, to accomplish what they wanted to accomplish, they needed to convert the people who were resistant to that message, and how do you do that without love?
I think that SNCC would argue, though, that it actually wasn't about converting those people, and that this is really a story about power. And this is where the for the sake of what is very different on the Benedictine and the SNCC side. But grassroots organizing in the Deep South was about power. And that doesn't mean that love isn't involved in that, and that, church and there's still space for all of that in. But ultimately, the reason that SNCC was moving towards voter registration and independent political parties was about trying to put people in county government to distribute resources in a way that were fair and equitable for Black communities. And so I think ultimately what SNCC was organizing around was building a base of power to sort of neutralize those folks on the recognition that, is George Wallace ever really gonna sign on and love, is it worth that effort, or can we organize in this way? But there's vigorous debate still and was, around sort of the approach, like the kind of, beloved community approach and like the moral righteousness kind of side of things, and the how do we organize for power so that people can't ignore us, that they have to deal with us. But thank you for raising that.
Thank you for a really good, interesting talk. It strikes me that now American society is so splintered into lots of different groups and with very competing ideologies. Does community organizing have to be different now than it was in the 60s?
I think that I am not especially qualified to answer that question, but the SNCC folks now are, working with folks like the New Georgia Project, who is essential in the organizing around the elections in Georgia, BYP 100, which is based in Durham, North Carolina, a lot of organizations that came about after the murder of Trayvon Martin in 2012 and have sort of grown in different ways in the last decade. But actually, that sort of core of grassroots organizing, the reason that SNCC veterans are in conversation with all of these groups is because these groups came to the SNCC folks and said, we need you to run with us with this. Like, we need your help. It's very much like both of these groups of people, like across generations, are moving forward because they still have that same core, like they're still listening to people and being in community with people and moving together towards a purpose. Those things are still at the center of creating change right now. So I think the landscape looks really different. Like SNCC will be the first to tell you, like, social media didn't factor into their life, and sort of the polarization of this moment, is different in a way that, that from 1968, which is sort of a similar moment. But yeah, I would argue at the core, grassroots organizing, the grassroots organizing tradition is still going strong and is still making change, like is still as powerful today. Thanks.
Any last questions from anyone? Thank you, Karlyn.
Thanks, everyone.
Hi everyone, I'm Trissa, if I haven't met you. For future reference, this was recorded today and will be posted on both the Digital Commons and the Benedictine Institute website. So if you want it for a resource for a class or you wish to revisit something, it will be there hopefully within a week. A couple of opportunities that are coming up from the Benedictine Institute yet this week. There will be a couple of guided tours of the Hain Museum's current exhibit, titled 140 Years of Uncovering and Sharing Secrets of Science. And this exhibit is based on the history of the St. Benedict's Monastery contribution to the sciences. Tours are still available for Wednesday afternoon and Thursday afternoon of this week. And if you're interested, you can certainly check in with me. Otherwise, there is a registration link on the bulletin board. And for our final building community of the semester, we'll be meeting at the main building, room 107, which is the Fireside Lounge at the end of the hallway there, from 9 to 10:45, and everyone's welcome, whatever time you might have, even if it's just a moment to pop in and grab a cup of coffee and a treat, that's fine too. A couple of things I wanted to highlight that will be happening quickly once we return for spring semester. Our Benedictine education program, that is an ongoing thing. We have one at St. Ben's starting January 12th, so very quickly after the semester begins. And I just wanted people to know that if you're new or newish, or you've been here for a while and you haven't had an opportunity to take this, this is a professional development opportunity that is open to all employees. So please ask me about it if you're interested, or the registration is already posted and up on our website, the BI website. And finally, this is a larger community and bigger campus event, and we wanted to make sure that people are aware of it earlier since it's a couple days series. The event will be Wednesday, February 2nd and Thursday, February 3rd. And it relates back to what Karlyn was talking about today. Roger touched on it a little bit earlier. And it's going to be about our Benedictine perspective on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, or DEIJ. And all of these presentations will be focusing and helping our non-experts to kind of understand more what it can look like from a Benedictine point of view when we're dealing with these DEIJ topics. Our guest speakers include Nicholas Tangen, Cindy Gonzalez, and Eric LeCompte. Tangen is an oblate of St. John's Abbey, a writer, coach, educator, and congregational organizer in Minneapolis. His work focuses on community life, community organizing, social action, and the life of faith through a Benedictine lens. Gonzalez is a 2014 graduate of the College of St. Benedict and a 2019 graduate at St. John's School of Theology. And she recently spoke for the 2021 Diocesan Ministry Day celebration, focusing on the importance of co-creating community that sees, listens, and advocates for one another. So very relevant to what we were talking about today. And then finally, Eric LeCompte is a 99 alumnus of St. John's, and for more than 25 years has led religious groups in the fight to alleviate poverty, address global conflict, and promote human rights. And so these are all going to be open for the wider community. We encourage the monastic members to join us, area church members, students, faculty, admin, support staff. Even we're hoping some of our other campus colleges might be able to attend as well, especially some of our Benedictine schools that aren't too far away. There are opportunities for faculty members as well to reach out to Roger or myself if they're interested in having any of these speakers attend one of their classes. So if you have any questions, please reach out and check in with Roger or myself. Thank you, everyone, for coming.